A few days ago, I released my video, sort of in response to SkillUp's videos that he has pushed out about the Dark Zone. In that video, I made my opinion and my stance on things very clear, and I do not intend to go over that all again. However, there was one particular part of the video that had a lot of disagreement with it, and that was the way that I tested my solo Dark Zone run. I said to be successful in the Dark Zone, you just need to practice the game a bit. It has actually very little to do with whether you have a group with you or whether you have a good build or not. And I still believe that that is true. Sure, with a good build or with a full group you can farm faster, but not having those doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot have fun and that you cannot be successful. To prove my point, I went into the Dark Zone by myself, completed multiple extractions by myself, went on a manhunt by myself, and then killed a 4-man group of rogues by myself. And I did that with what I thought to be a pretty shitty build. I basically picked up some random items from the stash. I had an alpha chest piece, a Firecrest backpack, I bought the Pakan that is available for purchase this week, and I did my run with these items. That is kind of where the problem is though, because even though I didn't have any gear set bonuses active, my main stats were still quite on the high side of things. And a lot of people agreed that this is not something that the average player would be running with. Over 500k toughness and 200k DPS, in the opinion of many people, this was not an average player build. Not even a bad build, so to speak. Now, I still disagree with that to this day. I still believe that the build that I put together was very bad, considering it didn't have any performance mods, considering that I left one of the gear mods unslotted, and considering that I didn't have any bonuses. But because I knew that the yes-no game simply doesn't work on YouTube when you're trying to prove a point, I wanted to take it one step further and go into the Dark Zone by myself, decked out in all purple gear. That resulted in a build where my toughness would not even hit 300k and where I had a nice, meticulous purple assault rifle. Yeah! Now this was something that would properly emulate a noob build, so to speak. In addition to that, I also created a game for myself, a challenge. I had to use this purple gear to solo the Dark Zone and to try to gear up only using the items that I was able to extract from my Dark Zone run. You know, kinda like as if I were to be a fresh player trying to advance his character. So in this case, it wouldn't just matter if I extracted at all, it would also matter what kind of items I extracted, because if I just extracted a whole lot of trash, then it wouldn't mean anything. But if I were able to secure that one Nomad holster, then I would be allowed to use that to advance my build. To emulate the amount of money that a new player has, I also restricted myself to only one reroll per full bag of loot that I extracted. So every time that I extracted 9 items, I was allowed to sell some of those items and then use that money for one reroll. Of course, I also wasn't allowed to craft anything. I was not allowed to reroll any talents on my weapons, as those had to be bought with Phoenix credits, and we pretend that we do not have that. And on top of that, to make the whole process as open as possible, I would also stream the whole thing. Which I did. I streamed the whole thing, from getting started to finishing up a good enough build and actively participating in PvP with those items. Now, before I start compressing this 6-hour adventure in just 5 to 10 minutes, I want to just mention one thing to those that all went into this video with their own agenda, with a bias. I know the comments that you're all ready to write down if you haven't already written them. Marco, you are the 1%. Marco, you cannot talk about noobs if you play this game as often as you do. Marco, an average player would never be able to do all those things. Of course, a comment like that makes anything that I say or anything that I do in their eyes irrelevant. But what I want you to do with those thoughts is I want you to hold them, keep them for yourself for another 5 to 10 minutes until you see what I did to get my gear, how I geared up, how the whole process went. Because, to be honest, it is nothing special, it is nothing that only I could have done. I got ganked a few times, I lost loot a few times, I encountered players that I simply couldn't beat because they were of equal skill and had a min-max build. I didn't have a chance against those guys. The gear gap in that case, especially early on, was simply too large for me and I wasn't able to compete with these other players. But that didn't stop me from enjoying the Dark Zone, moving on, simply going away from those players and completing a build that is capable of taking out those players in, get this, not even 2.5 hours of playing. That isn't 2.5 hours of hardcore farming, because as I said, in those 2.5 hours, I did get ganked, I died a few times, I did participate in PvP. No, those were just 2.5 hours of playing the game in the Dark Zone, and then I had a build ready to PvP. And with this video, I want to share my experience with you and how I managed to do that. So, let's begin. I started off my run in exactly the same way as the previous one. I went into the DZ06 Underground where I opened some chests, fought off some NPCs, and I gotta say, I'm not gonna lie here, admittedly the NPCs were already a lot more difficult to take down than I expected. I failed to downgrade when going from my min-maxed alpha build to my random pieces build, but this was really something else. I actually had to use cover a lot more often and be careful not to face tank any mobs. It was fun though, it made the game feel like a cover-based shooter again, and it made it a lot more exciting even when other players weren't around. Regardless of that though, it wasn't long before I had 9 items and before I was able to extract them at the DZ06 extraction, after which I went for a second round of collecting loot through the contaminated area and then towards the DZ05 underground to fight off even more cleaners. Now, while there were a lot of rogues on the map, the people played PvP in my session, most of them were around Brian Spark and around DZ02, so I was actually able to farm in peace. Because of this, I kind of felt that I was cheating the system again. I was able to farm without other players actively trying to gank me. After 15 minutes of playing and 2 full extractions, I had yet to see a single other player. So to make things more interesting, I ran over to restock, I equipped some of the items that I extracted to improve my build a little bit. Nothing special as you can see right here, I'm still running around with a few purples. But after that, I teleported over to the lower DZ to farm there and maybe PvP a bit if I had to defend myself. Of course, it didn't take long until other players jumped on me. As I was trying to farm the Caucasus Sports Store, a player jumped me from the side, I didn't see him coming, and if it wasn't for my recovery link, I would have most certainly died. But because the recovery link went off, I had some time to react, and after some back and forth, I eventually managed to pop his recovery link and kill him with the help of a well-placed stun grenade. It wasn't easy, considering the build that I had was, well, it was still really bad, but this was one of those scenarios where the skill gap was able to overcome the gear gap. Anyway, I escaped, I continued farming, and not much later I met that same guy on the DZ03 extraction, where I think we both just wanted to extract. Of course, I let the Twitch chat decide whether to engage on him or whether to leave him alone, and of course, knowing the Twitch chat, they wanted to see blood, so I went rogue. Turns out it was the wrong move, as suddenly 3 other players popped out of nowhere, and I got folded, losing a few of my items in the process. It didn't bother me that much though, it was my own choice to go rogue. I still had 5 items lying on the floor which I could pick up. And afterwards I could try to extract again. Unfortunately though, the whole situation around Brian Spark turned into a shitfest where players would go on each other over and over again, making it impossible for me to extract my items. I got killed a few more times even though I wasn't the one going rogue this time. I took some players with me though, which was pretty funny in some scenarios. But this was taking up too much time as I still wanted to progress my character, so to speak. So after a while, I saw an opportunity to take all my loot back, and I was able to run to the DZ02 extraction away from the other players. So I called in the extraction, and I killed another player, because I couldn't help myself. I like the PvP, what do you want me to say? However, me going rogue, that lured the other players to my extraction, including some of the min-max players that I simply wasn't able to fight off. So, instead, I decided to run it off. I ran off the rogue timer, I went through the underground, but that didn't stop those other players from hunting me down, and it became pretty obvious to me that making progress in this server, that wasn't really going to work anymore. There were too many players going rogue on everybody, and too many players with builds that are too good. But what did I do about it? Well, catch this, right? I went into a checkpoint, I matchmade for a Dark Zone session, I joined another player which made me switch servers, and then I left group and extracted the items by myself without much of an effort. I think that after that, things came and go pretty easily. I extracted 2 more full bags of loot after that. I went back into a checkpoint to upgrade my character with all the gear that I extracted, and I was just progressing really fast. I farmed and farmed and farmed, and I even showed on the stream a few runs on how to farm items without ever fighting a single mob, by just running around the map and opening all the obscurely placed sealed cash chests around the borders of it. I really think that it wasn't until 1.5 hours that I could look at my character again and say, well, I think I'm ready for some PvP now. Of course my build wasn't the best, but I was a little bit impatient. I wanted to try this out, so I did just that. I engaged on some players that wanted to extract, I killed 3 of them, but then I got a little bit too cocky and I eventually died when they respawned. I continued farming though, I didn't want to give up, I got ganked a few times after that, but even with my shitty gear I managed to defend myself from most of the rope cutting attempts. The third time that I went rogue myself, it was unfortunately another hacker. He teleported away as I downed him, and then once he had revived himself, he teleported behind me to try and gank me with his rapid fire cheat. He's got the Harry Potter cloak. I think he's got the 6 piece. Oh, what the fuck? He wants revenge. Dude, I'm under geared. Okay, what the fuck? This guy. Okay, let's go. Let's fucking go, boy. Let's go. You think you're good? Boom! Bitch! Needless to say, I was quite happy another hacker scum was brought to justice. Of course, that moment only lasted momentarily, because not long after that he came back and added an aimbot to the mix and proceeded to clap over my dead body, at which point, well, the decision was made. I was forced to switch servers once more, as I was not going to be able to avoid this guy. At this point though, I collected enough loot to equip myself with a 4-piece striker outfit. Why striker, you ask? Well, because that's what RNGesus gave me. It could have been any set, but it gave me striker. With that, I had these amazing accomplished knee pads for the triple experience awards and a tenacious mask. It is not the most ideal setup, is what the experienced players might say, but I'd say that it is still very capable of participating in PvP. And that is just what I did with it, and you can bet your ass that it went well. I won 1v2s, 1v3s, 1v4s, I went on manhunts killing multiple groups in a row with this build. Even to the point where, when I finally died, I had 5 or 6 people gloating over my dead body and asking in the global chat what kind of a build I was running, or how much toughness I had, or how much damage I had, or how I had spec my character. I had a few guys admiring the builds, or even calling out hacks, which at that moment only solidifies the points that I made in a previous video. And that is that the skill gap is much larger than the gear gap in this game. Yes, you can say that I'm the 1% of players able to do these things, but you know what? That is simply not true. You aren't required to be able to take on multiple players at the same time to be successful in the Dark Zone. All you have to do is know how to avoid them. On my journey, I as well encountered groups, players, and even hackers that I couldn't beat and could not get around. That is simply because I wasn't good enough or I didn't have a build that was good enough to compete. But in either one of those cases, I was just smart enough to say, fuck it, and walk the other way. Maybe switch servers, maybe lose 5 minutes of time because I lost 3 random yellows that I picked up from a boss. But with the drop rates as high as they are nowadays, ever since patch 1.4, you can literally get a full bag of loot in just 5 or 10 minutes. It is so easy to blame not being successful in the Dark Zone on not having a group or not having a good build, but in my eyes, the only thing that is truly keeping players from being successful is them simply not being good at the game or simply being inexperienced. And the only way to solve that is by practicing the game a bit. If it takes me 2.5 to 3 hours to go from an all-purple build to a striker tenacious accomplished build that folds over entire groups of players with Alpha Bridge, then the I don't have a group argument or the I cannot play the DZ because my build is bad argument holds zero value to me, and changing up the whole way that the Dark Zone works for players not willing to see that, not willing to accept that maybe they should just practice the game a little bit more, is just beyond ridiculous to me. In patch 1.3, I agreed that solo players had a rough time and that the game was simply too difficult for them. If they didn't have the perfect gear, if they didn't have a group, they wouldn't even be able to complete a few missions, let alone go into the DZ. And back then, I vouched for everything that made the game easier or a better experience for everybody, but especially for those solo players. However, patch 1.4 changed the game, and the thought that out of all the things that is your gear, or the fact that you don't always have a group, is what is actually holding you back, that is simply delusional. The stupid thing is though, is that there will always be a next excuse to be put on the table. Another reason as to why this will never work for some players. People will say that you cannot do this on consoles because the controllers don't give you that same amount of aim. Despite the fact that at the end of the stream I played with a controller for the fun and I folded a few guys with that I assume were playing with a mouse and keyboard. Or there's another reason, people say that they don't have that much time to play the game and thus they cannot get good at the game. Yet despite that, I have actually seen people with only 200 to 300 hours of playtime. I know those people. And for those that don't know, that equates to less than an hour playtime a day since launch. And those people still do quite well in the Dark Zone. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being inexperienced or bad at the game. Everybody has to start somewhere, and I will never look down on anyone that doesn't know every trick of the book. Everybody can improve and everybody should be able to have fun in this game. However, there is something wrong with the whole mentality of feeling entitled to do well every single time that you go into the Dark Zone when you aren't good at the game. The Dark Zone is a risk versus reward based zone. The risk is the dying and losing some of your stuff, you know, getting killed by other players, and the reward is getting the loot at a faster rate than that you do in other activities of the game. You should not always get the reward without being exposed to the risk. And although I will not claim that the current system is perfect in terms of how much you risk, and how much you're actually getting as a reward, this trend of wanting to turn the whole game into a giant Care Bear zone on behalf of the players that are not willing to put the time in, but still wanting to get all the benefits and the rewards, that has to be shut down. It has to be buried into the ground, and it needs a wall around it so large that even Trump wouldn't know how to go about it. Let me know your thoughts, and as always, I will see you guys later. Or, like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.